I'm looking at my list, and it says you also played another thing that I think you're fond of, or have a history of fondness for.
Well, yes.
Or you didn't play it. Final Fantasy. Did you play Final Fantasy VII? Is that playable?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I played Final Fantasy VII.
Okay.
Yes. When the power came back on.
Right. They were like
they let us into a room.
And Sephiroth was there, and he was like, "I cut the power.
I wish
to the world with a meteor."
So at first I saw about a 45-minute.
So that was
It's a good soundtrack. It's a good soundtrack. I was in a sort of like a 45-minute presentation with I don't know his first name. Katase.
I'm pretty sure.
Apologies for not having it off the top of my head, but I didn't want to totally butcher it, and so then I just half butchered it and then punted to a Google search.
Yoshinori
Katase.
Yoshinori Katase.
In which he sort of walked through a little bit more about that game. It didn't reveal anything too specific. One thing that's, I think, come out since maybe the last time we talked about this game was that Jason Schreier asked, so, this is episodic or multiple games. The sense is that this will end with sort of for people who play Final Fantasy VII, the escape from Midgar. Sounds like that'll probably be where this ends. And so what does that mean? So how many games? And Katase's answer was, well, we don't know yet. In my presentation, they said they've started building the second game already, understandably.
Yeah, okay.
I wonder if part of the reason is seeing how people respond to the first one. I think also part of it is, if you played Final Fantasy VII, the moment you leave Midgard, that world opens the fuck up in a way that it is hard for me to imagine.
There's still
it's hard.
You don't think it'll be Midgard, then is it Midgar? Then the Eastern Continent, then the Western Continent. Then you get
but you're in an
Highwind.
airship.
Not right away. You get that car for a little while. You got to go to Cosmo Canyon. You got to go to Golden Saucer. You got to do all that shit that is just driving. There's that whole Fort Condor section where there's a weird tactics game. That's all before you get the airship.
But they can't wait to a third game to get you an airship.
Yes, they can. You could leave that town, get the car. You could. I don't think you get the car until you beat Golden Saucer. You could do all the Eastern Continent shit, especially if they're not going to do.
You get in a car and it just turns into Final Fantasy 15.
I'd be okay with that. Yes, please.
But Nibelheim, there's all sorts of stuff going on the Eastern Continent, and they could make the thing, the spoiler for the first act of that game, be in the middle of game 2 instead of at the end of game 1.
Because it sounds like that's not going to happen. There was, I think some theorizing that maybe that would be their way of, one, now that this game is getting closer to release, if you haven't played it, it's going to be harder to avoid certain discussions about this game. But that second game is going to come out optimistically 3 years from now?
Sure.
Optimistically.
They have an engine. Whatever the fuck that means.
Right. So I didn't learn a whole lot from the presentation, but I did get a chance to play it, and the bit that I played was you're going to try and set the bomb. So it seems like towards the end of the mission that's been portrayed in a lot of the trailers, which is the beginning of the game. You are playing as Cloud and Barrett, and you go up against a bunch of small soldiers, and then one of the big, the spider mech that can jump on the walls and stuff like that. And the combat is really fun. I think they've very cleverly split the difference on I would love for there to be a $200 million game in which it has a fucking classic turn-based action time battle menu, but I realize that is not realistic. And I enjoy I feel like they have split it in a way that it satisfies sort of both camps. It feels really good to go in, slash a little bit with Cloud, get your meter up,
ATB up,
and then it pauses time, and you can use your attacks or you can cast spells. The nice thing is if you're this battle really only needs me to be Cloud, but then the other characters have their meters going up, and you don't have to switch them to use their abilities.
Right.
You can just hit L2 or R2 based on whether, in the corner, it will say there'll be characters assigned to those buttons. So you can just do that. It pauses the action. You can assign the action, and then the character will just do that on their own, and then warp you right back to the main character that you're playing as. There's I don't know that there's a whole lot to say, but I'm the things I'm interested in were the things they're not talking about yet, which is playing Resident Evil 2 and then looking at this game is so interesting to think about the different ways to revisit a work.
Yeah.
In which RE2 is not one-to-one, but like is in spirit one-to-one of taking a thing from roughly the same era and saying, what would that look like now? And while there are changes like the way Mr. X works, in which he truly does follow you, are smart ways to accomplish what you couldn't have done with technology back then, in which the rooms were discrete, in which the game could not simulate...
Literally couldn't work that way.
Couldn't simulate a character in other rooms while you were there. But had the technology existed, it is reasonable to conclude that they might have done something like that. And so it felt like RE2, what it was often doing was not radically changing what that game was. To a fault, I wish they threw out the sewers and the lab and just did something different in that part of the game. Or reinvented them in a way. There are parts
I had a better
liked.
time with those, but I get you.
But whereas like
Claire's run through in that is definitely, having now seen Leon's, Claire's stuff there is way better. Not way better. I mean, it's still the source, it's still the labs, but it's
just the police station is such a highlight.
It's so good.
And the other areas are just not nearly as interesting, and I wish they had spent some time just rethinking those. But it was the reason they didn't was because the things that they changed, the things they enhanced, felt like they were within the scope. It's sort of like when someone does, or we're doing a game with an 8-bit style, but then there's like extra technical flourishes of things the hardware couldn't accomplish. So it feels in the spirit of it, even if it's not necessarily hardware constrained. And that's what RE2 felt like. It was like, oh, it's in the spirit of what this game is about without fundamentally changing what it is. And because of that scope, that limited scope, it felt just like they could so dial in on certain things, and it was a really beautiful way to revisit something that you don't see done very often and executed to that degree. Whereas Final Fantasy VII is just something fundamentally different, where they are saying, we are going to revisit this, expand it. We are going to dive deeper. It's like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean exploring, is that filling in bits that the fandom has wondered out? Is that the designers revisiting things like, well, we didn't get a chance to do this the first time around? Like, here are storyboards of
that we thought we wanted to do, but
ran out of time and money and resources and all sorts of reasons. And I just don't know. Like, they're not talking about those parts. Like, we didn't. Some of these presentations had Q&As. Ours did not. I just wrote down on mine, like, does she die?
Who could say?
And I'm just so curious how they are going to, like, from their perspective, it must be, I suspect it must be tempting to reinvent, not change things to surprise the player. Or aren't they not? Or are they not doing that? Right. Are they going to play it like relatively straight, in which...
what if they did both? What if there was a select at the beginning that was like, is this your first time through? Or are you a returning player? And if you're a returning player, you're going to get a different experience. We're not going to say what it is.
Yeah.
Don't do that. That seems like a lot of work.
Yeah.
But we don't.
Yeah, and so like those are the questions that they are just not getting into, and may just not get into because that'll be sort of a surprise for players. But like the approach to revisiting an old work, both for one that was so defined by the culture around it by fans.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm so curious what Square thinks fans want and what fans think they want.
And also what they do want, but might not know they want.
And the tension between those things is like pretty profound, and I don't think I got much closer in 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, yeah, in answering those things, because there just wasn't much dialogue. I heard Barrett say,
"Suck on this"
a couple of times.
Did the robot in fact suck on this, and this being like a big plasma energy
No,
ball?
unfortunately not. We did watch. Huh?
Did the robot beat you?
No, of course not.
Okay.
I will say, like during the presentation, there was a lot more dialogue with Barrett, and there were several sequences in which, and this made me curious about where they'll go with it, in which I do think, I know there were some concerns that Cloud talking seems to maybe undersell the nature of his character and his like dismissive attitude, just as a result of talking as opposed to interpreting through text and limited polygons. And like, I actually think the performance I saw in like the 25 minutes or so they played, like he's dickish in the way that like
suck?
Yeah, he sucks.
Okay.
Like he's an asshole.
He's
and
Cloud.
actually there's a couple of sequences in which Barrett calls him on his shit, to the point of like, can't you feel the planet dying, you fuckwad? Like basically like just really calling, and like, and him just like, you know, well, if he was to wave his hair, that would be Squall. That's Final Fantasy VIII.
Yeah.
Squall waves his hair. Cloud does not. But there are like sequences in which Barrett character who is someone who cares deeply about saving this planet, who cares deeply about, because of his daughter, to go to the extreme measures that he is choosing to do. And the tension early in Final Fantasy VII is whether is Cloud someone here for the paycheck, or is Cloud because of Tifa and blah blah blah, he's actually invested in the mission. And I did like the fact that there were moments where, but the problem is I don't remember, maybe something very similar happened in FF7.
I think it did. But
having voice to it, having a more dynamic camera adds a levity to it, even if I currently remained sort of unswayed by the portrayal of Barrett.
Yeah. I am so curious about that thing to the degree that I don't even want to see it at this point.
Right.
I know that curiosity is going to make me buy that game, even if I bounce off of it 10 hours in. Mm-hmm. But my guess is, at this point, I'm going to want to see it through to the end. In the same way that even if these most recent Star Wars movies are bad, I would want to see them all the way through, just because I have that in me. It's such a key part of my childhood.
It's one of those. I just need to know.
I just need to know. I just do. Do you have any Final Fantasy VII questions, Kato?
I did have one about when you said you could switch to the other characters in battle. Mm-hmm. Can you just play as Barrett? Can you just stick with him the entire time, or would it force you back to Cloud eventually?
So you always revert, at least in the demo, you revert to Cloud when you're running around.
Right.
I don't know if you'll be able to swap who's the primary party,
right,
or the leader. As your party expands, because of the point of the game that we're in, you're just starting to expand that party.
You couldn't remove Cloud from the party in 7, could you?
Not that I know of.
I don't remember specifically enough.
So.
And I get that the story is Cloud focused, but in battle, if you wanted to just be one character,
in battle, there's. You still want to use the other characters, right?
Sure.
And basically what that means is they will attack by default,
right?
And then you basically are using their special abilities, because I don't think they'll use that. I think the meter will just fill and just sit there unless you prompt them to. So there was part of the battles where it's actually this is mostly long range. I'm just gonna stick with Barrett, and then as soon as I see that meter pop, hit R2, have him do the whatever, and you move on. So and also they the sort of hybrid combat system they have is largely sort of to placate old school fans, but they have a mode where you can turn it into just a pure action game, and it won't stop, and you can I think assign default characteristics for the other players. So maybe actually that version where you get rid of the turn-based stuff, the characters will just go do shit based on what you've assigned them to do, and then the game just never slows down. So if you want to play it as that, there is an option to be just a pure kind of hack and slash sort of game.
I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I'm excited to see more for sure.
Yeah, totally.